Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 28th of September. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, establishment shoots the messenger of Aussie housing crash and disturbing fake news about China. So first, establishment shoots the messenger of Aussie housing crash. And Craig, this is an extraordinary story that I've watched play out in the last couple of weeks. And it just shows you there's something afoot. There's a lot of nervousness out there that people won't admit to, but they should be.
Oh, look, Robbie, you know, the Royal Commission is having an incredible impact. I mean, I just had discussions with a person I come across the other day who was intending to buy a house using his self-managed super fund.
Right, yep.
And this guy was real keen on buying a place. But when he went to borrow through his mortgage broker, the mortgage broker said, well, sorry, we can't do that anymore because the big four banks are no longer lending to self-managed super funds on real estate. Now, just think about that for a minute.
Yep.
You've got a huge pool of money there. People look to real estate to secure their superannuation, and the banks are saying no more.
Yep.
That's a huge
and I've heard
trigger for the market.
No, and I've heard that one of the reasons for the banks are doing that is because bank loans to super funds for real estate are non-recourse loans, unlike the full recourse loans where people have to pay that debt till the day they die, even if they lose their house. So that's going to impact, and it's been one of the reasons. There's a whole host of reasons. I'm going to go through them in a minute. But it's one of the reasons there's a lot of nervousness about the housing market, and there should be. Ironically,
the only bank that's still doing it is Macquarie Bank, Robbie, and charging obviously the good interest rates for it.
Well, there's Macquarie Bank has its own history that doesn't surprise me. If we have time, I'll go through it a bit later. Okay, what I want to cover though is an episode that's happened in the last 2 weeks. So right now, the media's go-to person, Craig, on the growing problems in Australia's housing market is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. He's all over the place. And justifiably so. He's an excellent independent analyst and banking expert. He has experience in the banking system in the United Kingdom and in Australia. And what he does is analyses data. That's what he does, right? He has a daily YouTube show on the channel called Walk the World, which is becoming very popular. And he's getting lots and lots and lots of viewers of it, and it's so there's he's putting forward a view that is making sense at the moment because a lot of people are starting to realise this can't continue.
It's interesting, Robbie, because of the YouTube, because of social media, this is now bypassing the formerly controlled mass media and creating the sorts of freakouts that.
Excellent point, because I'm going to talk. One of the people we'll talk about in a minute is Michael Pascoe, who's one of the people who freaked out. And he was for 18 years the finance editor at Channel 9. And you can see that in that position, he had a lot of power over what sort of stuff Channel 9 reported about the economy. Well, now, so when there was only Channel 9 and the print newspapers, that's all you'd ever hear.
Yeah.
Well, now we get to hear some other independent stuff. And of course, people hear from us as well. We've been talking about this long before we even heard of Martin North. North's show, at the moment, he has a regular spot with economist John Adams, Craig, who we've interviewed on this program. John's famous for his warnings of what he calls economic Armageddon. On the 22nd of September, they discussed the Irish banking crash in 2008 with a special guest from Ireland, who's an Irish Australian, named Sean Quinn. And that's really essential viewing, the way they lay out what happened there. But here's one of the points of it. A feature of what happened in Ireland, part of which was a housing crash of nearly 40%, was the denial by almost everybody leading up to that crash that it could happen. Right? And that's important. That's an important parallel to Australia.
Robbie, can I point out, this is a really sensitive issue for a lot of people because there's so many people of Irish descent down here that came out or forced out because of the Irish potato famines and so forth. I mean, 100,000 people in the 1840s, 50s and 60s came out to Australia to escape the policies of the British Empire, these same monetarist type policies that are bringing the world to its knees today. 100,000 people. Ben Chifley, John Curtin.
Yeah, that's right.
Ancestry was Irish.
Big influence in the early Labor Party, and there's been a mini version of that since the 2008 crash in Ireland. Irish people had to go all around the world, and a lot of them came to Australia as economic refugees, effectively.
Yeah.
So what I want to point out though is the denial, because Martin North has suddenly found himself in the middle of a similar episode here. So on the 16th of September, he featured in a 60-minute story on Channel 9 called Bricks and Slaughter. So have a quick look at the opening of that story.
Good evening and welcome to 60 Minutes. I'm Tom Steinford. It's no secret Australia is experiencing a downturn in the property market. But if you own your own home or have a mortgage, there's worse news. Many believe calling it a downturn is foolishly optimistic. The slump we're currently in is more like falling off a cliff. Real estate and finance experts you're about to meet predict the value of your house could slide by as much as 40% in the next year. Yes, 2/5 of your home's worth wiped out in just 12 months. And if numbers like that eventuate, there's only one certainty. Our entire economy faces catastrophe.
This is looking right in the teeth of a gale, and that gale could lead us to a recession.
It's coming. And it's not if, but when. The end of Australia's property boom time. Party's over.
It's definitely over, and it's going to be over for quite some time.
Tonight, experts across the industry, the market analyst, the estate agent, the investor, the data scientist and the liquidator deliver their sobering verdicts. Get out while you can.
Get out while you can, absolutely.
At the worst end of the spectrum, if everything turned against us, we could see property prices 40 to 45% down.
So that was Martin North saying, look, one of his scenarios is a 40% crash in the market. Now, bear in mind the raw elements of what Martin North's talking about, right? You mentioned one factor. There's lots of factors. Let me go through some of the rest of them. Prices are already falling. That's one, right? Interest rates are rising from people that are right on the edge in terms of mortgage stress. You've got 1 million mortgage stressed households in Australia at the moment. That's where they're paying more than 30% of their income, gross income, to service their debt. Record numbers of borrowers at the moment are unable to refinance due to higher lending standards. They only got a loan in the first place because lending standards were garbage, right? They actually couldn't never afford their loans. Now they're trapped. They cannot refinance, and they're trapped by these rising interest rates. There was a wave of interest-only lending, Craig, that started in 2013 and peaked in 2016. And interest-only loans give you a 5-year period where it's interest-only, then it resets the interest and principal of payments that are much higher. Well, because it started in 2013, this wave, this larger than normal wave, those are resetting now, right? Those interest-only loans are resetting now. On top of this, you've got record household debt in Australia, which is close to, or effectively 200% of household income. Household savings are the lowest since 2007. And as we just pointed out in a press release this week, pointing people to Denise Brayley's presentation on Mortgage Fraud Explained, the mortgage fraud component of the Australian mortgage market is so huge, that's a time bomb in the system. It goes beyond whether these things are affordable. They didn't even come close, right? So all those chickens are coming home to roost. So there's a reason Martin North is saying that, and he laid out some scenarios. Personally, when I watched the show, 60 Minutes, I thought it was pretty mild and weaker than it could have been, right? Now, I want to make one other point about an element to bear in mind here. That show was broadcast on the 16th of September. That is the exact anniversary, Australian time, of the collapse of Lehman Brothers in the United States.
The 10th anniversary. Yes,
the exact, because it was happening the 15th over there, it was the 16th here. So that show was on the 10th anniversary of an actual mortgage crash that brought down a banking system, right? That didn't just happen in America, it happened in Europe, in the United Kingdom, it happened in Spain, it happened in Ireland. Like, these things happen, right? So bear that in mind when we come back from the break and show you what happened next. Welcome back to the CEC Report, where we're discussing establishment shoots the messenger of Aussie housing crash.
Yeah, right. The message is, shh, don't talk about it.
That's
don't discuss these things because you'll freak out the housing market.
Don't spook the horses or whatever they say. No, that is the psychology at the moment. And there's specific predicates. So when that show went to air, straight away there was this enormous establishment reaction. Now, when I say enormous, you know, we're looking in the right places, so we see it. A lot of viewers may not have seen how big it was, because if you're not on Twitter or stuff like that, because the media certainly didn't want to cover how big the reaction was, but the people reacting is the giveaway. So let me go through some. They all lined up to whack Martin North and 60 Minutes, right? Especially 60 Minutes, but mainly because they had Martin North on. The first out of it was to do it was a former advisor to Julia Gillard, who's a former Citibank economist, chief economist and treasury economist, Stephen Koukoulas, known as the Kook, and we'll put his tweet up on the screen. He challenged North to a bet that by the end of 2021, there won't be more than a 35% fall.
35%.
Yeah, it was so lame it wasn't funny. He's like, no, it was not going to get to 45%. I bet you it won't get more than 35%.
As if 5% makes any difference.
That's right. No, it's just
that site. Oh man.
But you know, this guy's an extremist anyway. So that was his effort. Other people you'll see on a clip I'll show in a minute. But finance journalist Michael Pascoe, right? What he did was extraordinary. We'll put some tweets up there where he went after the credibility of Channel 9 and 60 Minutes in a big way. He goes, as predictably bad as you knew the 60 Minutes housing beat-up would be, it was worse. Question, did they willfully ignore more balanced views? Were they pig ignorant of the subject, or just didn't care as they chased a scary story for eyeballs? And then he put up, a long time ago, 60 Minutes was real journalism, now, well, credibility. Martin North or RBA? 60 Minutes goes with the scary story and totally ignores the idea of balanced reporting of the facts. Now, what you need to know about Michael Pascoe, apart from what we said earlier, Craig, this guy has a track record though. Thanks to the modern internet, it's easy to find. In March 2007, he wrote an article for crikey.com.au where he went after, this was the headline of the article. So this is 16th of March 2007 when the subprime bubble was starting to blow up in America, right? When the guys who in the movie The Big Short were starting to get their bets paid out. And he goes, the headline was a super subprime beat up. And he said it's all sensationalism, you know, it's just for headlines, right? And was proved dead wrong. Well, a decade later, he's running the same line here in Australia, right? This is extraordinary. But the real sign that there was an establishment backlash is not it's not the individuals involved. ABC Media Watch went after 60 Minutes and Martin North. So here's Paul Barry, who fronts Media Watch now. He attacked 60 Minutes for its editing to sensationalise the story. Now, North admitted 60 Minutes edited the story to emphasise the worst case scenario, right? Because it's a commercial. That's what commercial TV does. Do I like it? No, but that's what they do, right? But but North also said, look, they did not misrepresent me though. He was very firm on that. 60 Minutes did present his scenario. The real motivation of Media Watch though was not the editing. It was the story itself. The idea that this would get serious discussion in Australia, that we could be heading for a problem. Here's the clip from Media Watch that's worth looking at.
North is a well-known property market bear, but he's not the only one warning that prices could fall. The Commonwealth Bank reckons they could drop by up to 10% from their peak in Sydney and Melbourne, where the market is hottest. And Louis Christopher told 60 Minutes he also expected a fall.
The market was clearly overvalued. There's no doubt about that.
But a 40% crash in prices? Highly unlikely, he wrote later in a column for Property Observer.
Our various government bodies have the capacity and the will to intervene if such a scenario were to become apparent. They can cut interest rates, they can introduce a first home owner grant, they can introduce quantitative easing, they can loosen recent regulatory requirements on the banking sector. There are precedents for all these actions.
So, what did he think of the program?
I was disappointed and unhappy. The segment was sensationalist to say the least.
Veteran finance commentators like Michael Pascoe agreed, as did respected economists like Shane Oliver. So, how come Channel 9 could present a calamitous economic scenario without a moment of qualification or balance? They told us,
we stand by this story and some of the risks it highlighted, and would note both Martin North and Jamison Lautet have told Media Watch that they believe we gave a fair and accurate representation of their positions with regard to the residential property market, household debt levels and mortgage crisis.
Well, that's true, but the vast majority of experts believe The severity of the crash they're predicting, on which the programme based its entire story, is bunkum. What a shame 60 Minutes couldn't find room for any of.
And as you saw there, Craig, Paul Barry says, why didn't we hear from the other side? Well, my goodness, we've heard from the other side for 10 straight years. The RBA, the Treasury, the government, everything's great. No, nothing to see here, nothing to see here. Finally, we're seeing some prominence for people like professionals like North and, who are saying the same thing we're saying. And, it's unbalanced, it's one-sided. Anyway, what I want people to... let me play a clip from this episode of Martin North's interview with John Adams and Sean Quinn. I just want to, it's worth seeing, they talked about the scenario, like when you're in a crash, like in the Irish crash. I won't go through it, go watch the episode yourself, but they talk about the fact that in the crash, your options are much limited, right? Much more limited than if you act preemptively. And I want you to listen what North has to say about that.
I guess the final point to make though is we haven't yet got to that brick wall, right? There's still some runway. So what I also would say is that we need the people who are running the show, not this show, but the big show, to actually understand how much of an issue we've got with debt, with the debt bomb, with the banking system, right? Because you could cut this off at the pass by starting to take some decisions now. And the thing that I'm frustrated about is that we're still sort of wrestling off first base to say, haven't we got a problem? Haven't we got a problem? Well, the 60 Minutes thing was an attempt to try and say, guys, we actually do have a problem, right?
And then you got pushed back to say you are scaremongering.
Exactly. And I'm saying, yes, well, I sort of am, but I'm trying to do it for the right reasons, to say all the evidence, all the data is pointing in the same direction, right? And yet still those, who are making the decisions at the moment and the regulators who are trying to support the system seem to be oblivious to the reality that we're seeing from our various points of view and from the data that we're there. So I think that's the other message I want to leave from this episode. Not only is, do you want to take a very bad decision here or a very bad decision there, but also what are the things that potentially could be done if there was an awareness that turned from awareness to potential action. So, my plea to the people who are actually leading the country at the moment is, guys, wake up, smell the roses. There are things you could be doing now which perhaps would stop us having to make that decision down the track.
So, Craig, that's the issue, isn't it?
Yep.
Doing something now to preempt and avert a crash, which means you can't be in denial. So why is GlassSteagall the most urgent and important thing we can do straight away?
Because it quarantines, Robbie, the necessary banking system that we have to have, the commercial banking, the boring banking, which is the system we actually have to have from all the speculation and from all the activities that's created this problem in the first place. In other words, it breaks up the banks. All this vertical integration where you see stockbroking houses, insurance houses, merchant banking, investment banking, and then normal banking, all in under the one roof, has created the problem because
that marriage, in this case, of investment banking and commercial banking, that's what has encouraged the banks to gamble on mortgages.
That's right. So what we've got a bill in Parliament right now to break up the banks, to re-regulate the banking system, separate out the commercial banking, let all the gambling side of this equation go its separate way. That's the way you begin to quarantine the system, and you've got something to work with. Now, we've also got proposals for a national bank to create the credit, direct the credit, use the credits in the system already, or the deposits, for example, like superannuation funds, to direct that money, that credit, into the productive economy. Now, everything we've been talking about, Robbie, has been a result of credit created by the banks in particular and lent into the speculative side of the economy, and it's causes crash.
And Craig, because these experts aren't going to do it, we, the public, have to drive this. So as we go to a break, watch this. If you would like to participate in the CEC's street activism, which is very important because we don't get the right media coverage for what we're doing. It's all self-generated effectively. But when you're out in the street with the public, no one can censor you, right? So participate with us. It's very important wherever you are. We've got lots of CEC people around Australia doing things. Contact us on our toll-free number, 1800-636-432. Send us an email, cec@cecos.com.au. We'll have someone speak to you and you can get involved. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Finally, disturbing fake news about China. And Craig, this is the kind of segment we have to do every now and then because, you know, one thing we've learned from the last 20 years, do not believe the claims of intelligence agencies, etc., that justify the targeting of another country, because we know there's a neocon element in the world that wants nothing but permanent war. And one of their targets right now is China. And you know, you can be scared about China as much as you like. Oh, the big bad Chinese, but ask yourself, do we want a war with China? If you start there and work your way backwards, then you start thinking, well, how real are these claims we're being told? And we can assure you, as we're going to go through, a lot of them are just garbage. So here's what we want to discuss now. In this current disinformation campaign, you saw it this week in Trump's appearance at the United Nations Security Council, where out of the blue he said, oh, we know China's interfering in the US elections. Give us a break, right? Jiminy cricket. More disturbing though, there's a claim that I saw in Canberra when I was there last week. It was all over the place. It was a concerted thing. A bunch of politicians went into the chamber and popped up and said China, and cast this accusation at China, that China is locking up 1 million of its people in the Xinjiang province, and this is proof of China's totalitarianism. So Penny Wong said in a 12 September press release, and she's the Labor foreign spokesman, quote, Labor is deeply concerned by continuing reports of the mass detention of China's minority Uighur population and other violations of human rights, including those outlined by members of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, UNCERD, in Geneva earlier this month. So China's locking up 1 million people and the UN says so. Well, it turns out, well, first of all, understand this. The Uyghurs in that section of China, that province of China, are Turkic Muslims. And they have been targeted for radicalisation over decades in the same program run by Western intelligence agencies that produced Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Right? There was a whole thing, we're going to radicalise these Muslims and turn them against countries like China and Russia. So there's a radicalisation targeting there. China has suffered terrorist attacks, things like mass slaughterings on train stations with gangs with knives, right? So there's a real problem they've got to deal with. 5,000 of these Uyghurs are in Syria fighting, and they say, we don't care what we're fighting for, we just want to train to use these weapons so we can take them back to China, right? So this is what China has to deal with. But that said, is China locking up 1 million people? Because that sounds really bad. Penny Wong says the UN says so. Well, it turns out, you know, if you'd pay attention because the UN's an authoritative body, but no, the UN has not says so. There's one UN committee, this Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and one member on that committee, the American member, right, whose name is Gay McDougall, she made the claim with no reference of sources at all. And from what the work we've done, all we can point to as sources are the kind of regime change apparatus that's funded by America, things like the National Endowment for Democracy and Radio Free Asia, which is an American propaganda thing, right? So this is not the UN saying there's 1 million people up there being locked up. This is an American on a UN committee saying that, reflecting the kind of rubbish in America at the moment.
Beware, Robbie, of fake news. There's elections coming up in the United States and here in Australia.
No, exactly. So, and I'll make this final point, Craig. She's not just wrong. Wong wasn't just wrong. She's hypocritical. If those Uyghurs, who are supposedly, you know, going to be incarcerated, fled to Australia for safety and came by boat, what would we do to them?
We'd lock them up.
We'd lock them up, right? Give us a break. But it's all fake news. It's lies, and we have to say it on this show because you're not going to hear it anywhere else. Craig, that's it. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining us, viewers. Tune in next week for more. The details of what we discussed today are in this week's issue of the Australian Alert Service. Call in for a free copy.